will lose about $113 billion. And this is not a small amount of funds. If the global economy lost it, then there will be a problem. And secondly, it assumed that this particular problem, since the Great Depression of 1930s, the global economy did not ever enter a pressure like this, which based on the statistics, you will find the expectation by the International Monetary Fund is that by 2021, the global output may likely drop by 3.4% as a result of the economic problem the global economy is facing. And secondly, nearly 90% of the world economy has been under some form of lockdown, disrupting supply chain, depressing consumer demand, and putting millions of people out of work. A lot of countries, a lot of economies have no option than to lay down staff. And thirdly, the main problem is that this particular pandemic mainly affected low skill, low wages jobs, while leaving higher skill jobs less. And it now resulted to widening the level of income inequality. All right. And another problem this particular pandemic resulted is that there is a sharp contraction, which makes the global economy to suffer more than it could ever sustain. And the United Nations World Economic Situation Prospect predicted that the global economy is expected to sharply contract by 3.2% this year. This is because of this particular problem. Everything is standstill. There's no any economic activity that is going on, which means by this, the global economy is at risk of entering into another recession. And another problem that particular COVID-19 brought about is that the global output may likely slash by $8.5 trillion in the next 2 years. Because whenever there is a deviation from the equilibrium, you will find that for that particular issue to return back to the equilibrium, there must be time lag. It must take some time before it lag. So this particular problem of COVID-19 we are currently facing is not something that will be resolved. No matter how the policymakers will try, it's not something that can be resolved within 2 months, 3 months, or a year. So that particular multiplier effect must definitely affect in the next 2 years. If the global economy or the global world is lucky, this particular economic problem may likely disappear in the next 2 or 3 years, which it's only can be achieved by a very sound policy framework of the global institutions like World Bank, IMF, as well as it also affected the level of global debt, because currently the EU is trying to see that it safeguard some countries, more especially those that are hit by this particular pandemic issue. For example, France, Spain, and other economic union countries that are bitterly hit by this particular problem. And it's also affected the level of productivity. And another problem is that the world trade is expected to contract by 15%. World trade is expected to contract by 15%, which means the global trade is negatively affected by this pandemic, because we can recall how the world is now, it's become stagnant. And up to now, some countries did not open their airspace. So assuming if you have some businesses in those particular countries, irrespective of how much you will earn, it will be impossible to transact with these particular countries. But notwithstanding, this particular pandemic, it also has some positive impact to the global economy, because without that, the application we are using now, so many people did not even know about Zoom. because the wise saying is that if some doors close, some will open. For example, the inventor of this particular Zoom we are currently using benefited much from the pandemic. And as well, the medical industry is now trying to see how it can come up with some solutions. And I believe by doing this particular research, you will find they will benefit in the future, even if it is not current benefit. But I believe in the near future, the medical industry in the global sphere will definitely expand. And as such, it will directly affect the global economy. Although I'm not saying it will not affect the human capital because this particular disease consumed a lot of lives. I think a lot of millions died because of this COVID-19, but more especially in the middle strata of the population that are active population, although those who died are mainly Asian population, but still you will find some vibrant and young people died as a result of COVID-19 problem. So that's why the global economy is now trying to resuscitate what we call new normal. All right? The new normal is trying to see that the global economy is now trying to settle after this particular crisis. Although this particular crisis is not yet over. It's not yet over because even currently you will find a lot of problems is currently going on in some economies. And as such, up to now, as I gave an example with just a sector of the global economy, that's aviation sector, is losing much. A lot of aviation companies, a lot of countries are now laying off staff. And as such, it will definitely affect that particular economy. And when you sum this particular problem, it will now affect the global environment. So I think the global problem of COVID-19, which started from Chinese economy, and that particular time there is a lot of trade war between Chinese and US economy, to an extent that the US president is mocking Chinese government. And he even called the virus Chinese virus or whatever, but it later on spread to other countries, more especially in US. It definitely affected the US economy and it hit. It now become one of the center stage where this particular problem affected the productivity, affected the skill, affected the innovation, affected everything because it took to an extent that no one can even go out. Talk less of, even if you think you can work from home, it will not be as productive as it is. So this particular problem now affected the entire growth, the entire productivity of the globe. And as such, we are now slumping into another recession, which if care is not taken, it will definitely affect the level of employment, the level of trade, the level of our environment will be affected as other problems also. So
Okay.
is it up to my time? Sorry.
Oh yeah. Just few
Oh,
seconds.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So let me round up by highlighting more part of the problem this particular issue affected, more especially in our local economy here in Nigeria. You will find up to now, people did not be out of that particular trauma of COVID-19 because up to now, a lot of businesses crashed and they will not be resuscitated because here the level of package the government is supposed to give to bail out those particular threats is not as efficient as other developed countries. I think Dr. Larry will shed more light on how their package there in the US is taking place, but we know here because of our institutional drawbacks, institutional problems of corruption and other things, you will find a lot of businesses are crashed down now, which increase the problem of unemployment, which is a serious burden to our economy, as well as the policymakers are now thinking to see how they can settle these particular problems, but it has to be done when we'll allow our institutions to work and corruption
Okay.
will be out of it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. To get back to you with questions. I
Okay.
think very important information were actually released. Thank you once again. Now
Thank you,
I will
doctor.
proceed to the second speaker. However, I will call Dr. Larry Omotola to kindly make his presentation. Thank you, sir. You need to unmute.
We can't hear you, Dr. Larry.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we can hear you now.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ali. Thank you, Dr. Awal, and thank you, Dr. Ali, for that very stimulating and interesting presentation. I really want to thank NYA for this invitation, because these kind of conversations helps people who are still working in diaspora to get grounded in the way things are working back at home, and helps us to interchange perspectives on some of the very consequential events that have happened in the last 12 months or thereabouts. So just basically, I'll be talking about the role of academic scientists in the policy response to a public health crisis of this nature. But when we look at the topic, the core of the topic speaks to economic shocks. So the first issue I'll be addressing is, economic shocks. The first argument I'll be making is that, virtually any kind of national crisis or any crisis that assumes very deep proportions affecting a lot of people tends to transform into an economic crisis. And the pandemic we have right now is a case in point. And then after that, I'll talk about the fact that the role that the academy or academic scientists are able to play in the event of a crisis actually depends on the kind of preparation, the kind of role that we have prior to the occurrence of that crisis. Meaning that the kind of networks, the kind of ecosystems that are in place prior to the crisis or that are not in place prior to the crisis really constrains what kind of response or what kind of participation or what kind of contributions we can make when the crisis actually arises. And, I'll close by just reemphasizing that, even in the face of the crisis, our role does not radically change from what our role prior to the crisis is, which is our role in education, in research, and in trying to inform policy. It is just that the emphasis of what kind of role, of how that role plays out, changes in this when the crisis arises. For instance, in the last 12 months, a lot of people around here have put a lot more time into working with policymakers, into trying to put a lot of time into working with people who are responsible for developing a public response to this crisis. So we've cut down a lot on the work we do in education. We've cut down a lot on the work we do in terms of research to put a lot of that time into practice. But do we have those kind of opportunities or do we have that kind of a role for academic scientists or for researchers or for academics in Nigeria? That's a question that's better answered by my colleagues who are practicing out there. So just looking at this particular public health crisis, I'll say that the COVID pandemic, for instance, has particular characteristics that really makes it really translate into an economic crisis very fast. And the first characteristic is just the nature of the disease itself. It's a very contagious disease. The reach, right now, there's hardly any country in the world that's not recorded a case of this disease, that's not been affected by the pandemic right now, apart from a couple of countries in a couple of islands in the Indian Ocean. Virtually every nation of the world has been reached by the disease. But it's not just the reach and nature of the disease that predisposes, that precipitates a crisis. It is also the nature of the response to it. Because we don't have a vaccine, because the response we have to it is basically to shut down the system, ask people to stay at home, have people to stay away. Therefore, the response itself kind of precipitates a crisis also. And we're at a point where there's a tension between how do we keep the economy open? Do we keep the economy open, or do we respond aggressively to limiting the spread of the public health crisis? So in a way, the public health crisis, the economy are so intertwined that responding to one is kind of responding to other also, and it has to be a balance in a way. Now, I move to the point that our role in the crisis depends on the nature of the networks, the nature of the ecosystem that were existing prior to the crisis. And I will use this particular crisis as an example. For instance, in Boston here where I work, early in February when this outbreak occurred, and it was evident that the outbreak was spreading to the US, a lot of the scientists, a lot of labs that were working in the Boston area came together, and they came together because even prior to the crisis, there's always been this ecosystem where all the labs, all the scientists who are around here, regularly interact. We regularly collaborate on different kinds of projects. So everybody knows every other person who has some kind of expertise that may be relevant to this. So I remember when we came for that very first meeting, we were talking about having like about 400 to 500 people who were coming together, brainstorming about what can we do in terms of aiding the policy response of the United States to this pandemic. And, I'm sure we must have heard about the Pfizer vaccine that was just announced recent. The mRNA technology for that vaccine actually emanated from some of the subgroups from that collaborative. A lot of the models that United States that were used to track the pandemic in the United States really emerged from that collaborative, from that Boston collaborative. So essentially, my point is that the response that we're able to mount as academics, or the contribution we're able to make when a crisis arises, actually depends on the limits of the kind of networks that we had prior to the crisis and the kind of ecosystem that we've been able to establish prior to when a crisis actually arises. And the last point I would just like to make is that, well, as academics, we put a lot of time into educating our trainees. We also put a lot of time into conducting research. What sometimes we don't put a lot of time into is building relationships with policymakers that can ensure that whatever are the products of our research actually fits into the policy process. And that's why in a number of African countries, some of the places where I've worked, you see a lot of disconnect between the work that are going on in the labs, the work that are going on in academic departments, and the kind of policy response that you're seeing in that same environment. And what happens a lot of time is that academics just face their own business, conduct their research, and do the education and publish in academic journals, and believe that, well, policymakers, if they want to make good policy, should just go read the journals. But it just doesn't work that way. Policymakers would not go pick up the journals and read by themselves. It's also part of our responsibility as academic researchers, to try to engage, to make that outreach, to create those networks that would ensure that when issues like this arise, for instance, I spoke about the Boston Collaborative earlier. Because Boston Collaborative, a lot of the funding for the work that was done in this, in the Boston Collaborative, for instance, the first set of diagnostics, that were used by the CDC were developed in our labs here. And that is a function of the fact that even prior to this outbreak, there's been an ongoing collaboration where whatever work is going on in our lab actually gets communicated to people at the Center for Disease Control, gets communicated to people at the Public Health Department through different kinds of engagement, different kinds of webinars, different kinds of briefing meetings that we've been having with them over time.
Yeah, I think we have some time, just a few seconds right now.
Well, yeah, but I think basically I've made my point. So fundamentally, just to recap, the particular nature of this crisis makes it both a public health crisis and an economic crisis that is intertwined. And policymakers are trying to navigate the tension between paying attention to the economy and paying attention to aggressively addressing the public health crisis. And our role as academics is really constrained by the kind of networks and ecosystems that we've been able to build prior to the emergence of a crisis. And when crises arise, we need to do more to ensure that the outreach to policy, we need to do more in terms of outreach to policymakers to ensure that whatever research we're doing actually fits into the policy process. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Larry, for this very interesting insights, especially from the US perspective. Now I'll call the third speaker, who is Dr. Temitayo Adeomu, to give us presentations. Dr. Adeomu, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. So the economy in the new normal, what's the role of the academia? Okay. All right, so the other two speakers have talked about the new normal induced by COVID-19, which overwhelmed the health systems. And I actually felt that the economic effect of it seemed even greater than the health effect, where it disrupted global supply chains. The financial system was heavily affected with almost 30% decline. GDP growth rate became negative for many countries. And the shock induced on changes in life and work. And the responses differed by countries, the type of development indices, the type of institutions that were available. It exposed the fault lines in institutional arrangement. And so we saw countries with superb safety nets and social welfare being able to absorb the shock better than other countries with the deficit in such systems. What are the trending issues in this new normal? First of all, globally, many countries decided, and are still deciding on a more nationalistic view of life. So lower investments in other countries, lower trade volumes, lower grants and assistance to middle and low development countries like us. Let's come to Nigeria. Unemployment increased. In fact, as at now, youth unemployment is 14.2%. Well, except for labor inelastic sectors like the health sector. Real income has really reduced because of higher expenditure. Electricity tariffs are on the high side, subsidies have been removed, there is inflation, and all this have combined to ensure that what you could buy for 10,000 in the beginning of this year, you couldn't get it again. Social services have declined in almost all sectors. And Nigeria is going into borrowing on the global scale. Debt servicing is 23% of 2021 budget. Deficit of over 5 trillion is also going to be financed by more borrowing. On the good side, innovative business models developed. So we see Zoom, we see Blue Jeans, we see all kinds of innovative ways of learning and of doing meetings. So what is the role of the academic? All these shocks and everything distorted all around. I feel that the academia should foresee, should forestall and try to cope with financial shock. But then how do we do that? The very first thing is R&D. Well, in a way, I'm going to be interrogating more than giving solutions. I'm going to be asking questions of the academia here. And so I want to ask, and I'm asking, so where is our R&D? What exactly are we doing in terms of research and development? Fine, we say grants and funding is low and everything. But what are we doing in the academia that is new, that could, come into cushion the shocks that have come? What common sense education are we giving to people? Or is it just the same old learning modes? Learning population out there that have not been incorporated into our formal system. Could we develop, I'm speaking now as an applied economist, could we develop new economic models? We have looked at the Keynesian models, the classical economics, and, can we apply country-specific models to these theories? Is the market really free? Can it always go back to equilibrium without proper guardians? Does it always go back? Has it gone back within this year? We have lessons from the 2008 recession. The United States had to come in that recession. It didn't just allow the market to come back because the market wasn't coming back by itself. Can we apply better economics to this financial crisis? I think as Lawrence Peter has given us an idea. It says an economist is an expert who will know tomorrow why the things he predicted yesterday, didn't happen today. And we keep growing. We keep looking at these things. So can we look at the history of economics? How did economics develop? How did they look at different countries? Many of these theories were based on what happened in those industrial countries. Can we apply this history and do models that will fit into Nigeria? The mathematical models are good, but that's when all things are equal. All things are usually not equal. Can we put a little bit of human face to our economics, looking at the philosophy of economics? Maybe we need to consult the invisible lands again. Let's look at theonomics, God, in our economics. That time, I think we need serious academia industrial link. We shouldn't just sit down in our ivory towers and churn out research that won't go anywhere. Like Dr. Motayo said, we really need to link. We really need to network. The industry needs us, but we also need the industry. What is the place of our industrial training? Let it indeed be industrial training. Let there be hands-on experience, for students. Why our professors, when they do sabbaticals, when they go for visiting scholarship, let's go to the industries. Let's go to the policy space. Let's go all out and see how we can provide problem-solving research. There are lobbyists everywhere looking for money. Can we have professors as lobbyists? We'll get more research grants and we'll become more relevant in the policy circle. We're just in the universities, we're just in the research institute. We need to interact there. We need to be narratives. And then we won't see them complaining that somewhere that doesn't make sense. Moving forward, I like academics to us a little bit. Viable academia and industrialism. Let's think beyond theory. Let's apply it to our context. Let's not just take it hook, line, and sinker. Let's apply it and let's see how it works. Let's facilitate problem-solving research. And I think shocks come, we'll be better prepared to provide solutions. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. Sorry. Thank you so much once again for the presentation. I'm sure the audience have enjoyed your presentation. Now, this is the end of the first session. Now we'll move to the second session where we'll ask questions and answers to each of the speakers. We will start with Dr. Larry Omotayo. Dr. Larry, please, the first question we have is that you are based in the USA, so we wanted to ask, even though you have indirectly captured what I wanted to ask, is that which role are academics playing in curbing financial shocks in the new normal in the USA? And which of this can be contextualized in your own opinion or adopted by the academia in Nigeria? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Like I said earlier, it's part of the tradition here that a lot of the policy responses flow from what policymakers learn from scientists in academia, whether from the, right now, a lot of people in the treasury are talking to economists all around the country and looking at their research, their insight, and trying to form a policy response in terms of how do they rescue the economy. Just like, the policymakers in the Department of Health are listening to people in the hospitals, people in the public health schools, trying to understand how they can respond to this. But the nature of the crisis, just like Dr. Adeyemo said earlier, the nature of the crisis in Nigeria is different from the nature of the crisis in Mali, which is different from the nature of the crisis in the US. And so, fundamentally, the first overarching lesson, though, is that the policymakers, the people who are making decisions, should not just constitute an island unto themselves. Because there are people right here who spend every day of their life, every time of day, trying to engage, think about these problems and how they've been solved in different parts of the world. Now, that's first. We can generally do better in terms of having the town-down cross-fertilization of ideas and letting that kind of sincerely guide our response. Number two is that the government, even though there's been a lot of political constraints, but generally the government has been so proactive in ensuring that the social safety net is ensuring that the economy doesn't just collapse altogether. That's one area where I know that the federal government actually has tried to, do some kind of social investment, but I think just looking at the magnitude of the crisis, I think a lot more attention needs to be paid to that, to really social interventions to ensure that just the bottom doesn't fall out of the economy. But, the magnitude of the crisis in Nigeria doesn't seem to be of the same proportions as the magnitude of the crisis in the US anyways. But I still think that there's a lot more we can learn in terms of how social interventions were used to bail out people in the crisis, especially people at the lower rungs of the economic ladder. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That's quite insightful. Now, also, so far, like you have said, discussions on COVID-19 are mostly based on public health or economic implications, either way. Now, you are a public health expert, and so I wanted to ask you, do you think a balance could be attained between the two implications of the COVID-19, that is the economic and the public health? As we move forward, do you think a balance could be attained? And generally, what do you envisage in that direction?
So here's the thing. I think it's a very tricky balance because there are two problems here. Number one, we're grappling with the pandemic where we're learning the nature of the pandemic itself in real time. So we know a lot about what are the economic consequences of the response that we're prescribing for this pandemic? If you ask people to stay home, shut down the economy, we know there's going to be a crisis. But for most of the things we're prescribing as a response to the crisis, as a public health response, social distancing, lockdowns, we're just learning how useful, how effective those things are in real time. And in hindsight, it looks like some of those things were really necessary, were really important. Because now we see places where some of those public health measures were not instituted, and we see some of the devastating consequences. From my own perspective, there's a tension, but that tension sometimes, I think sometimes is not well interpreted, because if we do not do the lockdowns, if the crisis spirals out of hand, the economy will shut down anyways. But looking to the future, I think what I anticipate is that now we have vaccines. The vaccines are going to start going into production and going into circulation. And hopefully we won't have the same kind of aggressive measures that we've had in the past. We wouldn't have to resort to those to address the public health ramifications of this crisis moving forward. But by and large, I think the lockdowns were justified.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. Even though it is dicey, attaining a balance between the two appears to be quite dicey. Now I'll go back to Dr. Hamisu Sadi Ali. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, you work in the university, and so I wanted to know your opinion. Do you think the universities in Nigeria are playing some, or can play specific and impactful roles to curb the economic distress in Nigeria, that is post-COVID-19? And if yes, how do you think we can do it? Thank you.
Yeah, your question is capital yes. Because globally, the academia is the backbone of every development. We produce the doctors, the engineers, the scientists, as the Omochayo is talking about. The policymakers in advanced countries solely rely on academia to find any lasting solution to every problem. Unfortunately, in a country like ours, it's different. As the Dr. Temichayo spoke about R&D, research and development. What are we doing in our research and development? I don't have the actual statistics of Nigeria's R&D to GDP ratio. And I believe if you check that statistics, it's not something to write from above. If you check the countries like Japan, the US, the Canada, you check their R&D to GDP ratio, it's very high amount because they believe in education, they believe in research. And I think, as you rightly asked, the academia as the backbone of every development has a role to play to curb the distress in this post-pandemic era, because the academia should provide the necessary solution to this particular problem through evidences, the real empirical evidences, research output that can be given as a yardstick for policymakers to make a decision. So that's why I believe we have a role to play in this post-pandemic era. For example, if you take the university I work currently, if government is really serious, they can invest hugely on research. I mean the modern research, not the type of research we are having in this kind of part of the world. The real research is the output that you can provide that can be sustainable way of solving problems. Let our research output be a problem solver. So I believe the research output come directly from the academia, the university, the research institute, as she is talking about. So we can play a role by giving out the real empirical evidences based on our research findings to the policymakers to implement so as to overcome any incoming problem that may bedevil our financial sector our environment sector, our aviation sector, and whatever sector we can think of. More especially, the issue of COVID-19, as the doctor said, and we all know it, is a mismatch between health and economy. Because of the health issue of the people, you lock down, and each and every sector of the economy must suffer from that particular policy. So the academia has a great role to play.
Okay,
Right?
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll go to Dr. Ademo. Doc, I think I will also ask you maybe a similar question, but you will talk from the perspective of a research institute. Yeah, so I wanted to also ask you, what roles are your institute or is your institute playing to cope financial shocks in the new normal? Or what efforts generally are you making to adapt to economic distress? I'm glad you are an applied economics, so you can give us some insights.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, like we know, NISA is a think tank. And so we have to link academic research with policy. So we don't do pure academic research just for the purpose of it. It's tailored towards some form of policy issues, some form of challenge that we've seen and that we think research will be relevant and timely. So each year there are policy issues, policy challenges that we think should come to the attention of the government. And this informs the focus of our research. And in fact, during this COVID-19, there was actually a research that was carried out by looking at the pathways of change or pathways of growth for the whole economy in the aftermath of COVID-19. So what we do in NISA is look at research tied to policy, present our findings, to the National Assembly, to all the policy stakeholders that are available, and let them take decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can hear some attempts from the Research Institute and also some attempts from the university, even though there are some missing gaps still. Now, I will go to Dr. Larry. Doc?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you that specifically also, what roles do you think Nigerian academics can play in helping Nigeria to overcome the economic and health implications of COVID-19?
So, my first reaction would be that I don't want us to get the impression that Nigerian academics are not really contributing to the response right now. I know a bunch of colleagues who are doing a lot of good work in terms of, just instead of basic research or in terms of bringing their expertise with understanding how to look at data to try to inform the response in a couple of states. I still think that from the public health perspective, the expertise to really look at data and interpret it and translate that into, action resides in a lot of our faculties. And that's something that, ministries of health can draw upon, or disease control agencies in the state, particularly at the subnational level in states, can draw upon to formulate responses beyond generic responses like national lockdowns and all that. To formulate appropriate responses in each of their domains. Because a lot of times when we're talking about the COVID-19 response, for instance, we talk as if the whole of Nigeria is just one monolithic entity with regards to the nature of the pandemic. It's not. And the reason why we fall into that trap is because there's just a handful of policymakers at NCDC who have to provide generic responses. But that's a place where state governments and departments and ministries of health can draw upon the expertise and the analytic expertise of scientists in their universities to provide tailored responses to the pandemic. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Also, let me just follow up. Now, like, for example, based on your experience in the US, even though you try to not to be making direct linkage, because you already have some existing platforms and structure to work with. But despite that, I would still want to ask that, are there any specific aspects of policies in Nigeria, be it fiscal, monetary, or public health, where you think the government actually needs to urgently rely on the academics? Any aspect in the policy that the government really need to depend on the academic? Just
Well,
missing link, if you can think of.
so, I mean, primarily, I'm not an economist. So I mean, obviously, there's a limit to what I can speak to that. But in terms of public health, I mean, just to be very honest with you, the government, you see a lot of the pronouncements and directives coming out of state ministries of health these days, and you wonder, why is there this disconnect? Why is there this disconnect? And the truth of the matter is that a lot of states are basically not looking at the data in their domains. They're not looking at the data in their domains. And that's not surprising, because it is just not the way those places are set up. That's not what they're set up to do. But that's a place where, I mean, and that's why I just mentioned, that's a place where, for instance, I don't want to mention particular states, but I know a couple of states where I know there are very capable colleagues who I know can look at the same set of data that we're looking at and form appropriate responses, not the kind of vacillation, incoherent pronouncements that are coming out of the state, that are coming out of the Ministry, of Health directives to the lower tiers in that state. So I think in terms of the public health response, just tracking the course of the epidemic in the states is something that state governments can actually draw on the expertise of the academics who are in the medical schools and the schools of public health on. And that's something that they really need to do, because the truth of the matter is that it looks like for some reason the epidemic is not getting totally out of hand in Nigeria for reasons that we don't totally understand. And let's hope it stays that way. But hope is not the strategy. Hope is not the strategy.
100% agree. Yeah.
So hope is the strategy, and we have people in our universities who can actually track the data, track the course of the epidemic, and help formulate appropriate response to it. Many state governments are not. Many state governments are taking hope as their strategy. That's the reality.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And then just one last final question for you. What is your general assessment of the link between research and policy in Nigeria compared to the US? Just the missing link, if you can just share more light on that.
So, I haven't worked a lot in terms of being an academic in Nigeria. No, but I've worked as an academic here. And my impression is that, when you do some work, sometimes you're consulted, you're consulted on a problem by some entities in Nigeria. And you spend a lot of time doing serious work, looking at the data and doing all that. And at the end of the day, you find out that your recommendations stay on the shelf somewhere. That doesn't always happen here. So when the Department of Health calls me for a consultation, and when I do work for them, they're not bound to use, there might be multiple people that come to different conclusions, but at least there's a feedback loop that helps me understand what are they doing, why are they not doing this, why are they doing something different. I don't see that kind of infrastructure, at least what I see from what I know from my colleagues who are working out there. I don't see that kind of infrastructure, that kind of relationship. That kind of relationship between the people who are making policies and the people who have the core scientific and analytical expertise out there. And I think it's reflected, you don't even need to be in the system. It's reflected in some of the disconnect that you see out there between the products and the recommendations and policies that are coming out of some of the policy avenues in some of the states. And you're like, but I mean, didn't we just see these papers published by so and so from this institution? I mean, how, there's just so much disconnect between what the government is doing and what these guys are telling us is happening on the ground there. So I think that's a place where both the policymakers and the scientists really need to work on creating a real infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. At least you have identified a very important gap. There is miscommunication between the academia and the policy makers. And I'm glad you have experience already where you were consulted, but not the recommendations were not actually fully implemented. Now, thank you so much. I will proceed to Dr. Hamisu. Dr. Hamisu, coming back to you, I wanted to ask that what do you think the government or relevant MDAs can do to mainstream contextual evidence produced by the academia in Nigeria into their decision and policy making to mitigate against financial shocks as we proceed towards the new normal? Sorry, you need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So my thinking is for MDAs and the government generally to benefit from the academia, more especially during this post-pandemic era, is that we should try as much as we can to value knowledge itself, because this is one of the gaps we have in this country. All right? When we value the knowledge, whatever comes from the academia in terms of advices to the government is very key to take into cognizance of that particular output. As I said earlier on, an academia is a problem-solving institution. And in some countries that value knowledge, you'll find that even the policymakers, those that are in the governance cycle, will never make any decision, more especially at this particular point in time that we are having a global problem, without consulting the academia itself. Be it if it is about the health issue, the medical department must be consulted. If it is economic issue, the economic department will be consulted. If it is social menace, for example, the sociology department will be consulted. They will sit down and come out with a solution to that particular problem. And sometimes you'll find our solutions are already on the papers, what we published. All right? So if the government can look into it with a very clear mind, they will find the solutions to those particular problems. So I think the academia will play a key role in providing any solution to any problem, in as much as the government and its MDS are ready to listen or are ready to use those particular research outputs to solve our current problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ali. Now, Dr. Ademo. Yeah, I actually went through your profile, all of you, before coming here. And just last 2 months, you actually wrote an article on food insecurity as the real menace of COVID-19 in Nigeria. Am I right?
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah, I went through it. Well, in that article, you actually suggested some solutions. And I was concerned that you didn't highlight how at the academia, specifically universities and research institutions, how they can play a role in solving some of the identified problems. So now, I now want to ask you here that from an economic perspective, how will the academia also make contributions to some of the solutions you actually identified in that your nice article. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the recommendations I made is actually the result of an academia looking at how these things can change. You see, the effect of COVID-19 on the agricultural sector has not been seen. You see, there's a lag in the agricultural sector. So what we have now is what is on ground. We will begin to see the effect of the restriction in trade, the restriction in movement. So farmers couldn't go to the farms, they couldn't harvest. Poultry farmers, livestock farmers, everybody was on lockdown during the COVID. Now we're going to start seeing, those effects in the coming months. And so it's what I put there were actually the result of academic research that we need social safety nets. We need to, have country-specific responses. We know we have smallholder farmers. We know we have smallholder value adders in the agricultural system. We need to be able to, give some lags for them to work, no matter, what is going on, because food is very, very important. So you see, but academia in doing this must collaborate with policyholders and make them see these things. So we know that there is a lag in agriculture. There's what we have now is what we've been eating is what we've had before. Now it's up to the academia to tell policymakers that you can't just do this. You need to see that this and this and this is what will happen. So we have research and development. We have all this kind of research, but we need to let policymakers understand it in simple language without big jargons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I will still ask you. Like I said, I went through one of your articles where I also found out that you have also worked on the well-being analysis in rural Nigeria. So I also briefly went through that article. And so I wanted to ask you that now that going forward into the new normal, what are the steps to be taken for the Nigerian academics to promote the economic well-being of the rural communities? Now I want to tie you to the academics now. I went through that very nice article about well-being.
Okay, thank you very much. Interestingly, the rural sector is kind of shrinking. When I wrote that, it was the rural sector was kind of more than the urban sector, but now we have a lower percentage of Nigeria in the rural sector. Be that as it may, we really need to, the academia really needs to see how the rural sector can be improved. We have always said rural sector livelihood is agrarian based, but then there's so much agrarian transformation, and unfortunately, it's for the worse. But can this agrarian transformation be tailored to be positive? So can we see young people leaving the farms, leaving the rural areas and coming to town to do what? But then if we're able to carry out research and see how the rural communities can be improved so that value addition itself can happen within the ruralities with social amenities, with enough infrastructure that would allow the agricultural system, the food system to change and drive the economy, then I think the academia will have really done a good thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Hamisu,
Yep.
Let me come back to you.
Yes.
Actually, also has to do with rural communities. I wanted to ask that academics usually have significant impact to the host communities usually. And so in your opinion, how do you think the academia can actually effectively contribute to the economic prosperity of their host communities, especially as we move towards the era of a new normal? How will academics actually make contribution to the economic prosperity of the host communities? Thank you.
Well, I think we need to differentiate between the academics and the university management, all right? Because it's two different entities, all right?
Yeah.
So I believe as an institution, a university, as an entity, it has a role to play for its host community to benefit, all right? Let me make it this way. For example, the Bayero University campus in Kano is surrounded by different villages, small villages, for example. And I believe as a university, the institution itself, those people that are living in that particular community are directly or indirectly benefiting from that particular institution. Why? Because if you look at, even if it is low skill job, you call it, but it's something to a villager, because I believe most of the universities are giving that particular slot to those surrounding communities by employing them to be security guards and other messengers and what have you. Even if it is a low skill job, but still to improve their living condition. All right. And secondly, I think as an academia, the main thing that the host community will benefit, it still has to come back to the what I earlier said, is the role that academia is supposed to play in terms of directing the policymakers by giving them the relevant advices that they can use to improve the living condition of the entire government, which those host communities of the universities are part and parcel of the people that are living in that particular state or the country itself, all right? And as an institution, for example, when you take like the Ahmad Bello University, the Division of Agricultural College we have there, I believe they are doing so many programs that can sensitize the farmers in those particular locality to give them the modern techniques they will use. And to some extent, they are even assisting them with some seeds, all right? The modern seed that can use to improve their farming activities. As we know, Dr. Temitai will be a witness because she is into rural agriculture, wherever, you understand? Because the main occupation of the rural dwellers is agriculture. So when you improve that particular occupation for them, it's like you directly or indirectly improve their life, all right? So it's important to know that the academics itself are given what we call corporate social responsibility to the environment, and as such, it improves the living condition. No matter how insignificant it is, it improves the living condition of those living around or the host community of the academic environment. Thank you.
Okay, let me just make a follow-up. Do you think that is what will still hold on even as we proceed into the new normal? What you analyze is actually has to do with the present situation. So yeah. What do you foresee? Is it the something that will still happen even as we
I think it's like the new evolve. Normal. In the new normal era, I think the academics need to do more, need to innovate, to think, because the global economy will never be the same as it is prior to the coronavirus pandemic. That's why the issue of new normal comes up. As of when the Second World War ended, the global economy has a serious problem of what we call Great Depression of 1930s. The global economy is at recession at that particular time. So the new normal comes in. But what I mean is, it's very difficult for the global economy to be the same as it is. So it is the duty of the academia to think deeply, to look at the literature on how we can innovate and give various advices to the government on how to tackle all these particular problems. To the academic host community, the academia needs to do more, to think. We can apply some models that we can borrow from advanced countries to apply. But as I earlier said, our main problem in this part of the world is institutional bottlenecks, institutional problems. And the collapse of our institutions is what brought about corruption. It's becoming the order of the day in our economy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think Dr. Ademu, so far we have seen records of a second wave of COVID-19 is actually coming up. In
Yes.
so many countries, the US, the UK, France, Germany, and others, records of second wave is actually coming up. So I wanted to ask that what economic solutions will you propose so that livelihood will not be seriously affected, especially in Nigeria, because it expectedly we also expectedly the second wave is also likely to
Yeah.
come into Nigeria. So what economic solutions will you propose so that livelihood will not be seriously affected as it does in the first instance? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The second one, so do we lock down again? That's the question a lot of people are asking. I did a short survey during the COVID-19 lockdown to see how people are willing to stay home rather than risk an infection. And I found a lot of people are not willing to stay for more than 4 days at home. Why? Because our economy is largely informal. And so, like I said earlier again, we really don't need to copy and paste policies or intervention. This is an informal economy. A taxi driver will need a daily wage. The market woman will need a daily wage. Let's interrogate other measures that will help to curb the spread of this disease rather than go into a lockdown. What about alternate days of going to work? What about these sanitary measures? Can we have a national orientation agency inform people of what to do so that they can go to work and still stay safe? I don't believe there should be a lockdown. I don't believe there should be a total lockdown. Yes, I might believe in a partial lockdown, but would you rather die of hunger than die of a disease that you're not sure we will even die of? Because we have heard that the fatality is not high. I know the public health people are going to catch me on this, but in terms of economics, so, a family would not see his children die of hunger at home. Okay, we should look at other measures: use of face masks, use of social distancing, alternate days of work. Get our priorities right.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think it's breaking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is better.
Yes. I'm through. I hope you got what I
Yeah,
got the point.
I think I've gotten you. Thank you. Even
Thank
though
you.
it's season. Yeah. And then my next question is to Dr. Hamisu before Dr. Ademo gets settled.
Yep.
Now, I also went through some of your articles, and clearly you are an expert in environmental economics, and you
Yep.
also work around carbon dioxide emissions. So I wanted to also ask you that as an expert in that area, how do you think issues like carbon dioxide emissions will actually play a role to the economy in the new normal? Climate change, new normal economy. That is the nexus I'm looking at. And then more importantly, more important to this webinar, what role can the academia play to mitigate such effects? So the connection, new normal, climate change like carbon dioxide emission issue, and then economy, the nexus.
Okay.
And then what can we do as academia? Thank you.
Thank you. And the issue of climate change, as we all know, even prior to coronavirus pandemic, is one of the serious problems that is facing the earth itself. All right? Because it's just you're trying to balance between what we call the manufacturing sector and the environment. In as much as you want your economy to move on, for example, Chinese economy, you must produce more than what you can consume, and you have to export the portion, which means your economy is doing well. At the same time, you refine what we call um, um, trade balance. When your export is higher than your import, all right? So by doing that, you are polluting the environment. Based on the machineries you use, you pollute the environment with that gas we call carbon dioxide, and which is the main indicator that measure the environmental sanity or environmental, whether the environment is doing good or otherwise. So by that, what you ask is that the academia can play a role in advising the government as well as the public on how to use or to move on from using the non-renewable sources of energy to use to renewable sources of energy. All right. So by using renewable source of energy, which is environmentally friendly, you will find definitely the level of our environmental quality will improve. All right. So by advising the government as well as government should use some of the outputs we produce in our research. For example, if government improve or enhance people to use green energy, for example, you will find green energy is environmental friendly. It has less negative impact to the environment when you compare with fossil fuel, gas, and what have you. It will not pollute the environment as the other ones. So the role of the academia is we should try as much as we can to continue innovating the green energy technologies. For example, biomass energy, solar energy, wind energy, and other form of renewable sources of energy that has less environmental dangers compared to non-renewable sources of energy. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the responses. Now, please, to all the attendees, please, if you have any questions, you can just post it on the question and answer box. The speakers are very much willing to respond to all questions and observations. Thank you. Now, as we move, I will also like to ask you maybe final question because time is going to Dr. Hamisu, that do you think the academia can derive anything positive from the present pandemic and even future financial shocks, if any? And how do we get anything positive? Everything we have been discussing, so many things, negativities. So what we wanted to know is that how do we think the academia, especially the academia, can derive anything positive from the recent pandemic, or even in future financial shocks? What positive things can actually be derived? Thank you.
I think in short, even the challenge that posed to the academia generally is a positive aspect of this COVID-19, because currently I believe, more especially in the medical aspect of research, they are spending sleepless nights to find the cure for this particular disease. And I think this is a positive aspect, because before the coming of this disease, we don't know anything coronavirus disease. But when it comes, it challenges us in the academics to stand against this particular problem. I think even the challenge itself, because I believe right from when it started, I read an article just yesterday, I think, read by someone from the Central Bank of Nigeria here, and the co-author is in Access University in the UK or something like that. They wrote that article, I think, around April. But as I checked ResearchGate yesterday, that particular article had 110 citations. Just in how many months? All right? So the challenge to the academia, I think we drive something positive to wake up and write to find a lasting solution to this particular problems. And the issue of financial shocks, definitely the global financial sector is trying to collapse due to what? This particular problem. When you check the NASDAQ, the other stock market indices, you'll find the shares or what have you kept collapsing because you close down the economy. Nothing is moving. Definitely the financial sector, even if it is not 100% crash, it will somehow crash. And as Temitayo just said, doctor said, for me, I'm on the opinion, I don't believe in total lockdown of the economy for the disease that some, as you said, did not even believe in. Even if it is this, as you said, the second phase of the lockdown has to be partial, not permanent lockdown. Because when you lock down the economy, as I earlier said, more especially at this part of the world, there are a lot of businesses that are crashed and they will never ever resuscitate. For example,
Okay.
here where I am, I know in the economy of my state, Kano here, a lot of people lost the meager capital they have, so they are living, and it's very difficult for them to get
Okay.
palliative that will tell them. So I think in brief, the challenge we faced to do more research in this aspect is a positive aspect that we derive from this. And the financial shocks, also a lot of people are researching to see how we can come out significantly and positively from the issue of this COVID-19. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And last question in questions from the moderator goes to Dr. Temitayo. Doctor, I just want to also know your thoughts on how government budgets should look like, especially for education and research in a COVID-19 world or post-COVID-19 even.
Like everybody, I think the budget on education should be better than it is. I think the budget on human capital, education, health, social welfare should be better. But then the question is, who is making the government understand the need for it? I know we've gone on industrial action. I know we've done many things, but who is there? Who is staying in the corridors of power and lobbying? Like I said, you can't just sit in the university and become big professors and then think the government will come to us. We need them just like they need us. And we really need to interrogate further with these things. So yes, I think it should be better, but then we should work on it. We shouldn't just write papers and be happy that we are being cited. No, we should write these papers and be happy that they are being put to use, to economic use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. With this, we have come to the end of this session. Now we'll try to answer questions from the audience. Unfortunately, we have lost Dr. Larry. Is unavoidably, he cannot be with us unavoidably. And unfortunately, you guys were shouting for no lockdown when he left. I would have wanted to hear his response on that perspective, because the economists here are saying there should be no further lockdowns. Okay, now let's go. Let me also try to read some questions from the attendees. Now, a question from Akinlua asks that does the 2021 proposed budget have the desired adjustment to cushion the shock of 2020? And how does a proper economy adjust to shocks of natural disaster? I will really want each of you to just answer in 2 minutes. Dr. Adeomu, maybe go first.
Okay, well, it depends on whose perspective you are looking at. The perspective of the government, maybe it's okay. But when you look at the people and you look at the budget components, you are scared. There's a budget deficit of almost 5 trillion, over 5 trillion, and it's going to be fine. More borrowing. As of now, the debt servicing is 24%. Tax revenues, tax revenue is also going to finance, and it has increased. So for the common man, no. And I think I think we should work more towards ensuring that we need to make our adjustment based on reasonable expectations. Expecting $40 per barrel might look good, but then remember in the wake of the COVID-19, oil price was even negative, and so
Okay.
I think there could be more adjustment. There could be better adjustments to cushion the effect of it. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Hamisu, how will you respond to this?
Well, I believe the budget of 2020 now is not yet approved by the government, all right?
Yeah,
Can you
but it
hear me?
has, we can hear you.
Okay. I think there are proper plans by the government to see that the issue of this natural disaster or the issue of this COVID-19 is being taken care of. I think based on what they projected to spend in our health subsector, although still what they allocated to education is not something to write home about, which means still our R&D to GDP ratio will not be something to write home about. As she rightly said, we have a budget deficit that is not only in Nigeria. I think most of the countries in the world will have a budget deficit, this time, more especially the developing countries because of this pandemic and what have you. So I think if you read the proposal, you will find they propose a lot of plans to see that they spend much to cope this post-pandemic era. But the problem is, will those money be spent as it is proposed? That's the problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Temitayo Adeomu, Dr. Mojisola or Seni ask you that I will read that I understand your presentation from your presentation that NISA is involved in developing research policy.
Yes.
How has NISA been collaborating with the academic sector on R&D to provide evidence for policy development? Also, how have you been able to get your voice heard or your research findings accepted by the policymakers?
Okay, actually, I started typing the response. In NISA,
Okay.
in NISA, our research goes through rigorous academic screening before it even translates to policy. So whatever we do has a very strong underpinning of academia. And so what we collaborate for reviews and other things before we take it to policy. And in getting it heard, a number of times our research work goes to the National Assembly and to other policymakers for them to look at it and see if it fits into what is being planned for the nation. So for example, for the 2018-2019 policy period, we're looking at the economic recovery and growth plans, and all our research were kind of tailored towards how the government was going to be able to achieve, these plans. And now we are looking at, the COVID-19. Like I told you, there was a pathway of growth, an article that came out with respect to that, which we always present, to our mother body in Abuja as policy briefs, as policy books, as position papers.
Okay, thank you. But do you collaborate with academic sector?
Yes, we do. They review our books. We go there to do
to provide evidence for policy development. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic then. Now, the next question is from Akibu Isa Murtala. He says, unemployment is one of the most damaging problems of Nigeria, and many people are disappointed due to widespread joblessness, especially 2016 to date. It seems like we are going around in cycles. Unemployment is high due to the economic recession, and we have a tough economic policies. How do we balance this? Maybe Dr. Amisu, maybe answer.
Okay, thank you so much. I think unemployment in its own is not only Nigeria's problems, but a global macroeconomic problem. Because when we go back to basic macroeconomic theories, we'll find we have 4 macroeconomic goals to achieve, and each and every economy is trying to achieve those 4 macroeconomic goals. And full employment is among those macroeconomic goals. So it's like the theoretical juxtaposition is that to have full employment, which is practically impossible. What I'm trying to say is the problem of unemployment is a global problem, or especially at this time. So I think my brother Agib Isamuritala, in the last aspect of his question, he asked, how can we overcome nepotism?
Okay.
If you look at the question very well.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I saw it.
So I think it's a very bulky question to answer, but I will try to give justice to him. And
I think because of time, we need to summarize.
okay, in summary,
Yeah,
if
because we need to run.
our institutions will work effectively, will definitely overcome nepotism. And what brings about nepotism is selfish and corruption. One of the great aspects of economics recently is the institutional economics. So if our institutions would work, that's why you will find most of our researchers are now going in line with the institutional quality. How does our institutions work? I think in countries like where you are now, in Japan or in US, the level of nepotism there is not as deep as we have down here in Nigeria, for example. So if our institution will work effectively, will overcome institutional challenge, and the level of nepotism will become history. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now
Can
to
I?
okay, fine, please go ahead.
Well, if we understand the political economy of Nigeria, we realize that vested interests are everywhere. But then I think the country needs to develop some sort of collective action to interrogate our leaders and to demand accountability. I think when we begin to demand for that, things will begin to change. It's everywhere. It's what is happening. It's a clientelist system that we are in. People put you in office. You need to repay them. But then we also need to begin to say we want you to be accountable. We want good people to be in the right places, and this collective action is really important. Not violence, just proper structured, collective action. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The other question, I think I will also put it to Dr. Ademo. Ali Abdullahi asked that how do we compel those with political clout in government to invest more time and attention in addressing limitations that could aid the academicians in providing solutions to our local and societal problems?
Let's keep talking to them. We keep talking and make them understand. Yes. See, you keep asking. In the Bible,
okay.
the widow kept asking the judge, when will you answer me? When will you avenge me? And after a while, the judge was tired and said, okay, what exactly do you want? So let's keep asking. Okay. Let's keep talking. Let's keep writing. Let's keep directing things to them.
Maybe I think a follow-up question from Dr. Oseni also, and I will try to round up now. Or that what are your specific suggestions in ensuring that the research data generated by academics become acceptable by the policymakers? Much has been said about research findings ending up in the shelves, but what can we do to overcome this challenge? You have said a lot about it, further interrogating. How do we create that, bridge that gap? How do we connect? How do we make the work sellable to the, because we are in the research institute and you sell your data in quotes.
Let's also ensure that the data we collect are correct data. Integrity in the academia should be top-notch. Nobody should be able to ask for it. Nobody should ask for your data and then you are hesitating. Let's have our data collection system, our sampling system, I'm an applied economist, our sampling system, our data, let everything be filled, be on a scale that nobody can rubbish it. Then they will believe the academia. Then when what we say will be true, and when they see it is true, they will begin to believe us again.
Okay.
To add a bit on what she just said, I think
okay, that's fine.
Ethical aspect of research.
Yeah.
The morals of research. If we follow the morals, I doubt if the policymakers will doubt the outcome that may likely come from us. So when we stick to the ethical aspect of research, it's like we don't have any problem with what will come out from us. Thank you.
Even though, Dr. Ademo, even though you try to actually respond by chat, but on record, I will want you to also say it out. A question by Nazir Haliru. What can you suggest to researchers and research institutions in Nigeria to focus on how to address the issues of food security, and what indicators do you suggest the policymakers
Oh,
will
okay, okay.
track?
I
Yeah,
typed
you
that out.
responded, but just for
Yeah,
record
yeah,
purposes.
yeah. So I would like to say that we should look for more innovative ways that our farming systems can be improved. We know we have smallholder farmers in charge of all the production in Nigeria. And I'm not even saying we should turn them into large-scale farmers. I'm just saying let the farming system from input supply all the way to consumption be such that they are working effectively. And that's where our research comes in. How will the input supplier get to the farmer in a way that his income is assured, and the farmer also gets good input? How will the farmer get good remuneration for his work and take it to the processor? How will this value chain work? We need to research in this value chain system, value web system, and see how we can connect all this together. And that's I think that's where food security research should go into now. We look at nutrition. How is nutrition enhanced along the value chain, and how the people get the best for what they do? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers. We had a very stimulating presentations. I can see even though the public health scientist is not available, but we could see the economics are saying no to lockdown, and then the public health expert is likely will have said yes to lockdown. It's a very nice discussion. We have learned a lot, and I'm sure the attendees have also learned a lot. I think, unfortunately, the president of the Nigerian Young Academy is on a national assignment and he's not here with us. But I will call on the General Secretary, Dr. Kasim, to give us just some few words, then we close the session. Dr. Kazim? Dr. Kazim? Okay, he seems not to be available, even though I can see him online. Okay, I think I will start by saying thank you to all the speakers. First, Dr. Larry had to leave us because he had a flight to catch. Despite his very tight schedules, he was able to spare about 70 minutes to be with us in the webinar, and he shared so many interesting information. So we say thank you to him. The NYA deeply appreciates the commitment. And to Dr. Hamis Sadi Ali, thank you so much, sir. We actually appreciate a lot for your very insightful some statements. You talk a lot about R&D to GDP ratio. You force some of us to go and read and know more about it. It's very interesting issue, and we actually thank you a lot for the presentation. And on behalf of the NYA, we say thank you for inviting, for accepting to be with us tonight. Oh, sorry, this afternoon. Sorry, yeah, it's night. Thank you. And then Dr. Ademu, thank you so much. We invited you at a very dying minute, and despite that, you are able to prepare slides, you are able to respond to questions. I went through your articles, pulled out so many things, you responded so nicely. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. On behalf of the NYA, we say thank you so much, and we hope that you will be with us anytime we knock on your door.
Thank you very much.
Once again, I think with this, we have come to the end of the webinar. Unfortunately, to all the attendees, the next webinar is supposed to hold in December. However, due to the so many events, the Christmas and the New Year breaks, the NYA Executive Committee has decided to suspend the December webinar to January. So we are not going to have any webinar next month. The next webinar is going to be in January. Most likely is going to feature a very interesting topic, especially that will cut across both social science, medicine, and engineering, specifically has to do with systematic reviews, meta-analysis, and stuff like that across all fields. So thank you so much to the attendees. We are very much grateful for being with us this afternoon. Thank you so much to all the speakers. Once again, thank you to members of the webinar committee. Thank you to the executive committee, committee of the NYA, the EC. Thank you so much once again. Thank you, and God bless all of us. Bye-bye.
Okay.